Hey everyone, welcome to another CrowdLinker Fireside Chat. I'm Aram Melkoumov, the host. Thanks for tuning in. On the show, I'm interviewing innovation leaders who are working on big industry disruptive problems from within large enterprises. My guests have been in the trenches and have lots of practical advice to share about building quality digital products, staying agile, and most importantly, fostering an innovation mindset and culture within an enterprise. This is episode number 11, and I'm joined here today with Ravi Mehta to talk about adopting an innovation DNA. Quick bio on Ravi. He's a consumer technology and product leader who has scaled products that have impacted millions of people and scaled teams to meet the challenge. He is currently the executive in residence at Reforge. And previously, he was the chief product officer at Tinder. And previously, before that, product director at Facebook. And before that, the VP of consumer product at Tripadvisor. So amazing to have you on our show, Ravi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation.
Cool. Yeah, likewise. First question I have is, I want to learn a bit more about what you're doing in your current role at Reforge. What does your roles and responsibilities look like there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting role. So I've known Brian Balfour, the CEO of Reforge, for a number of years. I actually was with Brian at his first company, Vixmo. I was the head of product there and worked with Brian for many years. I'll give a little bit of background on Reforge. Reforge is a company that's providing career accelerators for people that want to accelerate their career in growth and product. It's really become a knowledge center for some of the best practices around growth and product thinking and product strategy. And one of the things that makes it really unique is the content is created not by academics, but by practitioners, operators who have gotten insights as part of the work that they've been doing, and Reforge helps them turn those earned insights into insights that they can share with a broader community. And so one of the things that's been really important for the company is being able to build content based on operator insights, and then also have operators be able to present the content in live sessions and walk through cases that are relevant. And so Brian, about I think a year and a half or 2 years ago, created this executive in residence program, which solves for a number of different things. One, it solves for operators and executives who are looking to go into their next role, but need some time and space to think about it. They can come and work with Reforge for a period of time, 6 to 12 months. And during that time, they help contribute to the content development. They help teach the programs in the live session. And so it really solves two things for the participants in Reforge's programs. It gives them exposure to executives and operators who are not just thinking about these things, but really doing them day to day. And for the executives in residence, it gives them the opportunity to contribute what they've learned to a broader audience, and then gives them the time and space to really think about what they want to do next. So far, it's been a great role for me. I started in August. I jumped right in. I started leading the product strategy program. That was 6 really intensive weeks. And then since then, I've been working on some other things with Reforge, as well as exploring some ideas for what I want to do next.
Nice. Well, I mean, with your background, Ravi, I think you can really go anywhere. So that's great. I love what you're doing with Reforge. It's a great initiative, and I think passing that knowledge that you've built over the years to others, I think is like, priceless in many ways. So hope everybody's learning from you.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the best parts of the tech industry is the willingness to share ideas and help make everyone better.
Yeah, nice. Well, that's kind of why we're doing the show as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Pass on that knowledge. Cool. I wanted to ask you a question. We had the chance to discuss this earlier in our pre-planning call, and one thing that you mentioned was what it takes to adopt an innovation DNA. I want to talk a bit more about what does that mean to you and why is it important?
I think it's really important because of this fundamental idea of disruption. So Clayton Christensen, famous professor from HBS, really brought this idea of disruption to the forefront with the work that he's done. And the fundamental idea is that large companies tend to solve for internal measures of success once they get to a certain size. So that might be solving for EBITDA or particular metrics on your P&L or other metrics that Wall Street is looking for. And when companies start to take their eyes off of the customer and really focus on growing the businesses that they have today, rather than thinking about the businesses that they want to have tomorrow, it creates white space for fast-moving startups to come in and better solve for the needs of customers and do the things that are difficult for a large company to do because they're so committed to the current path that they're on. And so big companies, as part of their success, open themselves up to disruption. And it's particularly true because big companies have shown that there's really interesting markets to be had. Jeff Bezos is famous for saying, your margin is my opportunity. And so, startups know that there's fertile ground by looking at the markets that big companies are playing in and thinking about those markets in a different way. So I think an innovation mindset is particularly important for established companies that are looking to continue to grow the businesses that have made them successful, but also think in an unfettered way about what the opportunities look like in the future.
Mm. And you kind of touched about some of the things that companies, large enterprises typically have to focus on, like, pleasing shareholders and, EBITDA targets and all that. What else? Like, why do you think large organizations fall into the trap of optimizing more for themselves versus optimizing for the customer, like the end user, the buyer?
I think it turns into a very human thing on the ground. Very few companies, if you talk to the people at the time that they're being disrupted, don't understand that they're being disrupted, especially the people that are in the ranks and trying to compete day to day. So there's very few people at BlackBerry that would have said, no, we're not getting disrupted by the iPhone. They knew that it was happening at the time that it was happening. But humans are kind of programmed to align their work with the incentives, and big companies have incentive models that incentivize people to think short term and to generate results in terms of objective metrics. And so the easiest thing to do for a big company is to look at a particular metric that has driven success at the past and commit to moving that metric and achieving their quarterly results as a result of moving that metric. And you rinse and repeat, do that over and over again. And the people who are really good at doing that are the ones that rise within a lot of larger companies. But that really focuses people on the short-term metrics optimization rather than long-term innovation thinking. It takes a lot of foresightedness. It takes a lot of risk tolerance to step away from a business that is doing well, or even a business that's not doing well but is large, and say, look, we're not going to focus on that anymore. We're going to focus on something else. I think a great example is Netflix. It seems obvious now, but Netflix had their DVD rental business and made a very difficult decision at the time to step away from a business that was generating a lot of cash and commit to streaming. Everyone knew at the time that streaming was going to be the future. Few companies knew along what timeline, and very few companies were willing to say we're completely stepping away from our other modes of distribution and going to commit to streaming. Disney's a great example. They're doing great now, but they were late to the streaming game. Other companies who are not doing as well were also late to the streaming game. So it took a lot of intestinal fortitude for Netflix to say we're going to turn away from a business that's doing well, but really optimize for the future and know that we're going to go through a couple of years of headwinds before we get to a point where this is starting to generate returns. And at the moment you're doing that, you don't know exactly what the future is going to look like. So you have to have a significant amount of fortitude and a significant amount of conviction.
And you mentioned that companies need to have that foresight ability to see like potential changes and adjustments they need to make in their business. Is there, like, what would you say to like a corporate innovation leader who's at the precipice or at the cusp of that moment, and like how can they detect this early on, or what can they do to kind of like prevent from failing in terms of this type of shift?
I think the most important thing, and it sounds very simple, but it really is the key, is to talk to customers and have really rich customer conversations. And to talk with to segment the customers and start to talk to the customers that are the most forward thinking, are the early adopters. One thing I've seen over and over again, as companies get bigger, it gets harder and harder to talk to customers. User research turns into, at a startup, it's just a matter of sending an email to a customer that's emailed in, or picking up the phone and talking to someone. At a big company, they tend to think about user research on a quarterly time scale with budgets in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And from the time you have a question that you want to ask a customer to the time you get an answer, 2 quarters have gone by, and $100,000 has been burnt. And it's just not a way to, actually understand what customers want. And there's no reason that the people at the larger companies can't just pick up the phone and talk to customers and understand what's going through their minds and how they're thinking about the business. And so the thing that I really recommend for internal innovation leaders is to not just talk to your average customer, but find the customers that are the outliers, that are the outliers in some way. So they might be outliers in terms of the level of spend that they have with your company. They might be outliers in terms of the size of the organization. It doesn't need to be that, the size of their organization is large. It could be that, your very small company customers are the ones that have their ear to the ground and understand what's happening. It could be customers that are using the product in a way that feels non-obvious. It's not a way that you designed the product for, but they're using it to solve a different problem. And through those customer conversations, you can get to an understanding of where things are going. A good example of this is, in the last few years, I've spent a lot of time with people in the Gen Z age demo. So anywhere from 13 to 22. At Facebook, I was on a team focused on Gen Z and understanding changing social media habits for younger users. At Tinder, I spent a lot of time talking to younger people about how they meet each other. And through those conversations, you can not only see what problems they have, but what problems other demographics are likely to have, because they're often at the forefront. One example of this is in 2017, I was having a lot of conversations with people in the Gen Z market. And we got some early signal around, there's a rise in the need for short form video. And a lot of people are talking about Vine and Musical.ly. And then people started to talk about TikTok. And so very early on, we were able to see that there was an interesting trend here before TikTok was a household name. And that came from talking to users that were really on the forefront, both because they were younger and because they were the trendsetters within their communities or their social circles.
Can I ask, in those situations, and like at Facebook and at Tinder, it must have been like massive scale of users that you could have spoken to. How did you efficiently go about, like, as you said, not spending quarters doing that type of intelligence, but spending, weeks or, 2-week sprints to get that, intel to make some decisions forward? Like what tools, what process did you use to make that efficient?
One of the interesting things to me about Facebook is most of the companies that I'd been at in the past had user research departments, but the number of user researchers to PMs, that ratio was very low. So Tripadvisor was very committed to user research. We had user research labs on site, which was unique for a company of Tripadvisor's size. But there were only a couple of people within the organization that were providing all of the user research capability for 100 plus PMs. Whereas at Facebook, they have user researchers, probably 1 for every 2 PMs or sometimes 1 for every 1 PM. So there's a massive amount of people there. There are also exceptional people that come from, really deep backgrounds in user psychology and user behavior, and really understand how to structure a conversation with customers in a way that gets at the heart of what they need. So a lot of it had to do with just making the investment. The other thing that really helped was that there was user research sessions happening every week. And in the past, my experience had been, if a user research session was happening, you would lock the interview guide maybe a week or a couple of weeks ahead of time. Then you would go in and have a very structured conversation and then come out with a report. And it would take, on the time scale of weeks or months. Whereas with the Facebook sessions, every week there was open time so that, if there's questions that you had the prior day, there was room within the interview session to actually ask those questions. So the latency between having question for customers and actually getting an answer from customers was on the order of days or maybe weeks. And so I think that's a really important thing for larger companies to solve for. Companies often think about, the fact that we need to move faster. We need to move faster like startups move because they're so agile. And startups are not agile because they have a high velocity. Startups are agile because they have a low latency. In fact, startups can't do as much as big companies just by circumstance, just by physics. They don't have as many people. They don't have as much capital. But the thing that they do have is they don't have the bureaucracy that inhibits their ability to ask a question and then get an answer in a short amount of time. And when you can have low latency thinking, you can have a hypothesis, you can get an answer to it. It really changes your relationship with customers. It changes your relationship with problems. And it turns that relationships more into a conversation than something where, you sort of go on a track for a long period of time, figure out you're on the wrong path, and then make a pretty dramatic switch and do that over and over again. So it makes the whole problem solving process a lot more high resolution.
Interesting. Yeah, I think with everything you're saying, it really becomes really apparent that the only way to kind of avoid this type of trap is for enterprises to really be more customer focused, customer obsessive. Is there any advice that you would give to innovation leaders who are going to be listening on how to improve their customer obsessiveness in their current organizations?
I think there's a number of tactics that companies can use. One, I think, is doing research more frequently. So just having the opportunity for people to have conversations with customers. Two is not separating the people who are making decisions about products from the people who are talking to customers. So oftentimes what happens in large organizations is you have a customer support team or customer success team who's the one that is having all the conversations with customers. And then you have a product team who barely ever talks to the customer support team. And so there's this disconnect that happens. And so I think it's really important for product managers, product leaders, other innovation leaders to embed themselves into those customer support organizations and make sure that they understand what's happening on the ground. So, part of it's listening to the inbound, part of it is making the effort to make outbound conversations through user research. I think there's also more intelligence that companies can get through social listening. So understanding what conversations people are having about your products or related products on social media, looking at reviews. A lot of startup founders will look at the reviews for apps that are doing really well or products that are doing well and just solve all of the things that people mention within the reviews that they want to see, and then all of a sudden create a disruptively popular product. And it's a really scrappy way of figuring out what the opportunities are. So I think having both the outbound as well as the inbound, as well as not just thinking about your product, but also thinking about other products and the whole life cycle of things that a person might use in their daily life is important. Because at the end of the day, your product is not nearly as important to your customer as it is to you. And it's important to understand how your product sits within the whole portfolio of things that a person might do in a day, rather than thinking about your product in isolation.
Interesting. And with the experience that you've had, Ravi, at different organizations, can you share any kind of examples of kind of measures that you've taken? Like, if I'm not mistaken, I think when you were at Tripadvisor, you came up with the instant booking concept, right? If I'm not mistaken. So not that specific example, but any other kind of things that led to you in terms of finding an opportunity and actually creating it?
Yeah, instant booking is a really good example. And it was a sort of a company-wide trajectory. I was the lead for the instant booking team, but it was part of an overall company-wide strategy. The insight was that people were coming to Tripadvisor to use Tripadvisor to make decisions about their travel choices. In fact, there was some research that the company did that something like 70% of all hotel decisions were informed at some point by Tripadvisor content. So they were making their decision on Tripadvisor, but they were buying elsewhere. And so there was a leak. There was a disconnect between the value that people were getting on the site and Tripadvisor's ability to actually participate within the transaction and help make that transaction easier. And so the instant booking concept came out of that insight, which was to enable people to book directly on Tripadvisor rather than have to go elsewhere. And so in that way, it was very customer driven in the sense that it was oriented towards making customers' lives easier. The other thing that was really unique about TripAdvisor that allowed TripAdvisor to pull on that thread was that people were coming to TripAdvisor not just for hotels, but also to learn about restaurants, also to learn about attractions and things to do. And so TripAdvisor had this really unique position in the market in that it was the place that people would come to plan their trip. Unlike Kayak, where people are just price shopping for a very narrow set of things for flights and hotels. Unlike Booking, where people are going to book hotels, TripAdvisor had a much more holistic role in a person's trip. And so the idea of adding Booking was something that TripAdvisor could pull throughout all of the different places that were represented on the product, including restaurants and attractions. So the company purchased La Fourchette, which is a large restaurant reservation company in Europe, purchased Viator, which is the largest attraction booking company. And today, TripAdvisor has really transitioned from a user-generated content site to much more of a transactional marketplace. So it's an interesting example of how a consumer insight in terms of how you can make a user's trip better, how you can streamline the process for them can actually become a thread that you can pull through the entire strategy of the company.
No, it's interesting. I think with what TripAdvisor did there, it led to so many other companies in different industries and verticals adopting this kind of instant booking feature. So it was very interesting that you worked on it. Thanks for sharing the background there.
Yeah.
Another question I have is, there's a challenge among kind of innovation leaders in terms of identifying what problems they have like the right to solve for their customers. Do you have any kind of frameworks or general guidelines around how large organizations can define the role that they play in their customers' lives?
I think a lot of times what innovation leaders at larger companies run into is they figure out what the market looks like and what the different strategic areas of opportunity are, and then identify really high potential markets without necessarily thinking about the role that they currently play in customers' lives and how to work into adjacent use cases and deliver things that not only are interesting strategic opportunities, but where that company is uniquely positioned to play, both in terms of the strengths that it has as a company and the way in which customers look at the product or look at the role that the company plays. So I think that's, again, an area where consumer research plays a really important part. It's essential for companies to understand the jobs that they do for customers. There's this framework called Jobs to be Done that has been popularized in recent years, and the insight is that people don't use a product to use a product; they use a product or they hire a product to solve a job in their life. And the classic example is, people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill bit, they want a 1/4-inch hole. And actually people don't want a 1/4-inch hole, they want to hang a picture of their family. And why do they want to hang a picture of their family? They want to do that because they want to be reminded of their loved ones in, every day when they're in their office. And so, by working backwards from, what is it the actual reason that a user is using a product, you can figure out, what role you're playing in a person's life, and then from there figure out the adjacent things that you could provide to the customer so that you can hire that company to do related tasks. And so a lot of companies that have portfolio strategies do a fantastic job of understanding that and building that. And as you broaden the portfolio, it increases the range of things that you can solve for a user and increases your optionality around those things. Great example is Amazon. Amazon started with books. They earned the right to sell books to people. They moved into DVDs and video games and other things that had a similar dynamic. And today they're the everything store. And so they've earned the right to sell anyone anything at the best price. Yes, anywhere.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I think the framework that we use is the 5 whys, which gets us to like the reason why somebody really wants to do something. It's an interesting exercise that when we do with our clients, it really gets like the root of what it is that they're really trying to solve. So it's great that I hope it's used more because it really helps get to the bottom of it. I had a couple more questions, Ravi. It's more around like you've been an innovation leader for a long time. what would you say is the biggest misconception around the innovation mindset, from your perspective that you've seen?
I think the biggest misconception is that you can do that you can separate the analysis and understanding of what people want from the execution of that. And so I see a lot of companies spend a bunch of time figuring out what they want to build, and then spending a bunch of time building it in a phase, and then they launch it and it doesn't work. And so this is what I think one of the reasons that innovation has a bad rap in the industry at times is because people look at that and say, well, that's just innovation teams just spend 9 to 12 months building things that are high risk that probably won't work. And so it's it's a lot of money to invest for something where we're not sure what the benefit is going to be. Whereas I can take all of that resource that I'd invest in innovation and put it towards hitting our revenue goals for the next 2 quarters and be in much better shape. And so, I think now there's a much deeper understanding of this, but ultimately innovation is an iterative process. It's a matter of having a conversation with the market. And the way you have that conversation is you develop a hypothesis, you build something, you put it out there, try to do that as quickly as possible, figure out how the market's reacting, get the feedback, integrate that feedback in and build the next iteration. At Reforge, we talk a lot about loops and how people should really think about the elements of the products that they're building or the things that they're accomplishing, not in terms of a funnel or not in terms of a waterfall, which moves from stage to stage to stage, but really in terms of a loop where the output of the loop connects with the input of the next loop. And when you do that, when you create those circular relationships, you get to a point where you're not just growing linearly, but you're growing in a compounding way. And so I think that loop-based thinking is not just important for specific elements of growth like acquisition or retention, but it's also important to think about your innovation process as a loop, where the input is an understanding of customers, the output is a product, but then once you release that product, that feeds back into your understanding of customers. And the faster you can travel through that loop, the faster you can innovate, the faster you can generate innovation that the market really wants.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible to be too customer centric, or does that not exist?
I think the risk in being too customer centric is over listening to customers in the sense that you do exactly what they say. Customers are not always able to articulate directly what they want in a product. And so if you ask them, what are the next 5 features that they want to see in a product? In a lot of cases, you won't get a very accurate answer, or they'll think they want something even though they're using the product differently. So I think, rather than listening directly to customers, ultimately it is a matter of using the 5 whys and using that in various parts of the process of having those customer conversations to understand what is the customer saying and why are they saying it, and then building for the root need that they have rather than building for the specific thing that they say. So, I think a really good example is Snapchat versus Facebook. Snapchat took a very different approach to social media than Facebook. No customer at the time would have said, I want messages that explode after a day. I want to have an app where I can use all these silly lenses. I want an app that's messaging first rather than feed first, or camera first rather than feed first. And so it wasn't a matter of asking customers what they want and building it. What Snapchat understood was that Facebook had created a way of interacting with your friends that left some really critical white space. So a lot of younger users didn't want to share on Facebook because they didn't want the things that they shared very casually to exist forever. They didn't want all of those things that they shared to be shared with all of their friends and family and parents and friends of parents. They wanted a more private place. They wanted a more fun place. They wanted a more casual place to connect with each other. And so the fundamental need was really around a social need around creating a more casual place, a more private place, and the features that they built enabled them to do that. So, there they solved for the fundamental need rather than ask the customers what they wanted.
Yeah, I still don't get Snapchat in many ways. Maybe I'm not the right target customer, but I've always been fascinated about its growth and its potential that they've created. I wanted to ask a question that comes up a lot in calls I have with innovation leaders at different enterprises, and I think it depends on the culture that the organization runs from an innovation mindset perspective. But what I've heard a lot is sometimes um, innovation leaders struggle to get their ideas in front of the decision makers, like the key people making decisions around budget or approvals or innovation in general. How can organizations encourage more of a bottom-up innovation approach?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it is, oftentimes you see companies that are innovative, a lot of the innovation comes top down because you don't have to justify.
Yeah.
One of the trickiest things about justifying innovation is you do need to have conviction. You do need to be willing to take a risk. And it's much easier for someone to have that conviction if it's their idea and if it's the leader's idea than it is if someone is coming from within the organization saying, here's a need that we have to fill. I think there's a variety of ways to do that. The first one is that leaders should create a climate where they enable bottom-up innovation. It is very rare for a company's leadership to have all the good ideas and ultimately to be responsible for the innovation roadmap for a company. There are definitely some visionary leaders that are able to do that, but it's often a lot more effective, especially as companies get larger, to enable that bottoms-up innovation. And it's really effective because the people within the organization are the ones that are closer to customers and often have a better idea of what those needs are and how they might relate to an innovation roadmap. So I think the first thing is for leadership to be open to bottoms-up innovation and create a climate of bottoms-up innovation. I think the second thing that's really important is for leaders to share a very clear articulation of a company strategy so that bottoms up, people understand what the context is that they're innovating within. Oftentimes, I think where innovation roadmaps go wrong is a team will have a really good idea, but it just won't relate to the company strategy. And then you have this thing where you're asking leadership to invest in something that's just outside the frame of what they want to accomplish. So I think it's incumbent for leaders to be really clear about what the strategy is, what the constraints are, and where are the areas where they want to innovate. And where are areas where they feel like it's outside of the company strategy and distraction. So those two things, I think, increase the hit rate for people being able to innovate bottoms up. And then if you are a person within an organization that is looking to convince leadership of an idea, I think there's a certain set of things that you can do in order to make leadership more open to that idea. So the first thing is to make sure that it ties to some understanding of the company strategy. And if you don't have a full understanding of the company strategy, being really clear about what your assumptions are around that strategy is important, so that when leaders are looking at the idea, they can separately engage with what's the problem you're trying to solve versus what's the solution that you're using to solve it. Oftentimes being able to talk about those things separately is important. And then I think the third thing is to take a really evidence-based approach and a really iterative-based approach to innovation. And so if you come to a leadership team and say, hey, I want to spend the next 12 months, the next hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars on this idea that we have, the chances are going to be no. But if you come in and say, we want a limited amount of time, a limited amount of resources to prove this hypothesis, and then based on that hypothesis, if we prove it, we know what the sequence of steps is going to be, so that we can then ask for a larger amount of resources and then invest more fully in the hypothesis. That's the right way to approach innovation. And this is something that Amazon does incredibly well. So Amazon, will allocate resources to incredibly crazy and far-field ideas. One example is like there's a treasure truck that they have, which drives around cities. I've seen it in Seattle, and has some deal of the day, and you can get alerts, based on where the treasure truck is going to be and go. And they have a certain stock. Sometimes they sell out. Sometimes nobody wants the product that they're trying to sell. So crazy idea, might work, might not work, but they were willing to invest enough in it to understand, is this hypothesis valid, and can we build something bigger out of it? And so Amazon's very good about giving people just enough resourcing to prove out an idea, and then add more resources in as it becomes clear that particular ideas are getting traction. I think it's one of the reasons why Amazon has been so good at innovating in so many different fields, is because they do take that very iterative and controlled approach to innovation, where they're willing to try things, but they also want to see evidence very quickly.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. I did not know that. I'll check it out though. I wanted to ask, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, Ravi, a couple personal questions. I mean, you have to kind of always be at the forefront on everything that you do in terms of where the trends are going, what's on the horizon, you know, how to stay innovative. How do you, you know, stay competitive as an innovation leader yourself? Like, where do you go for research? You know, what books do you read? Who are your mentors? Who do you look up to? Or who do you get new ideas from? Can you share maybe some that we could pass down?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're in like a golden age in terms of business thinking and business knowledge. There's a lot of the classics. You know, I love Clayton Christensen's work. I think he has time and time again, you know, written things that are just penetrating in terms of their thinking, and also timeless in terms of their thinking. So, you know, there's a number of people like Clayton Christensen who are classic business thinkers who I think create a great foundation. There's also, you know, a lot of newer thinkers that, you know, are sharing out what they've learned on Substack and Medium and other places. You know, I like, you know, Sarah Tavel has fantastic work. Lenny Rashitsky has fantastic work. And so there's actually no shortage of really great thinking about, you know, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to build a marketplace, if you're trying to build a social app. And I think right now I'm finding the thing that's harder is actually figuring out what, you know, where to put your attention rather than finding the really good thinking. So, you know, there's definitely high quality folks. You know, I follow a set of people on Twitter and other places and get information from there. You know, I also think that there's something unique about a book versus a blog post. You know, when someone sat down and said, I'm going to spend a year or two to comb, you know, all of the great thinking within a particular area and put that together in a really concise and structured way. You know, there's, you know, it's less in fashion right now, but there's some really good things that you can pull out of those, especially if you, you know, spend the time to, you know, not just read the book, but actually think about how you're going to apply it. I love Reforge as a way to level up. For many years, I've contributed to Reforge as a guest participant, and then sent a lot of my team to the courses. And so being part of that community has been really great in terms of immersing myself in good thinking. There's a lot of other communities like that. There's a lot of creators now who are creating and organizing communities around particular ideas. So I think right now there's so many good resources to stay sharp, to freshen your thinking, to get alternate ideas. It's a matter of figuring out like where do you want to spend your time so that you're getting maximum ROI on that time that you're spending.
No, that's amazing. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Before we get into the quickfire questions, which I love ending with because it's like quick one-liner tidbits people can walk away with, I wanted to ask right now, what organization do you feel has done the best job of adopting an innovation, a DNA, and why do you think about that way about them?
I think Amazon has done the best job of adopting innovation DNA, and you could see it in the diversity of products where they've been successful. You can also see it in terms of not just their successes, but also their failures. They have tried a lot of things that have not worked. You know, I think the thing that makes them really special is the willingness to connect really deeply with the customer. Their culture is based on customer obsession, and then to try things, double down on the things that are not working, and then learn from, or double down on the things that are working, and then learn from the things that are not working. So I think they are really a model of innovation. There's other companies as well that people look to. I think Apple is an incredibly innovative company, but they're much more innovative in a focused way. And I think they're more innovative in a top-down way. So it's harder, I think, to take lessons away from Apple. But I think the lessons that you can take away from Amazon are really broadly applicable.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. I got some quick fire questions for you. So basically one-liner questions, one-liner responses. Maybe I'll join some together, but I wanted to ask, what is something innovation leaders should stop doing like tomorrow, right away? And what should they start doing more of?
I think they should stop optimizing for the short term, and start thinking about the long term, and then planning to reach the long term through shorter term iterative results. So there's an interesting balance there. There's a nuance. It's not about optimizing for the short-term revenue target. It is about optimizing for short-term learning that you can get.
Awesome. Okay, great. You mentioned that there's a lot of different material out there that, it's hard to kind of find a focus, but for you right now, what is like the most interesting digital trend that you see most likely going to take off in a big way in the next couple of years?
Oh, that's interesting. I think we really fully haven't appreciated the impact that video is going to have on the industry. This year has forced people to spend a lot more time on video. A lot of companies have quickly added video-based experiences. Other companies like TikTok have disruptively grown because of an interesting take on video. I think almost all products will be video centric 3 or 4 years from now. But I don't think all incumbent products have really figured out how to add video in the most compelling way. So it's a very near-term thing. There's of course AR and VR and all that stuff. I think that's a little bit further out. Right now, I think the thing that people are going to clamor around over the next 2 years is to understand what's the right way to add video, both in terms of entertainment as well as in terms of connection and social interaction into their products.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, a few people that I speak to are saying that they're really tired of Zoom and these virtual things, but nobody's really hit it out of the park yet in terms of creating a good video-based experience that might in the future replace in person. Who knows? But definitely a lot of innovation capabilities there for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. Ravi, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on our show. I really appreciate all the knowledge and wisdom you've shared with us today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.